If you would like to follow me, I'm going to be in Matthew chapter 15, two verses that we'll get to in just a moment. I think you all know that we talk a lot about Christian men and women being in a personal relationship with Christ. That, of course, is a relationship based on His love and His grace. And needless to say, if it's a real relationship, then it's not merely a one-sided experience. It goes back and forth, back and forth. And so we receive God's love into our lives, but then we give it back. We reciprocate. That's the kind of back and forth that we need to have taking place in our life. One of the main ways we are able to reciprocate God's love is by means of our worship. In other words, our worship of God is one of, if not the primary way by which we give our love back to Him. A.W. Tozer has written this. He says that worship of God is our highest obligation in life. Now think of that. Is it really that important? Yes. Yes, it is. Tozer says it's even more important than evangelism. And his rationale is that evangelism is our gift to men, but worship is what we give to God. And our obligation to God is greater than our obligation to men. I agree with that. Now that said, I came across an interesting paragraph on worship by Mr. Ray Stedman. He argues that all people have within them this worship instinct, that everyone has this impulse to worship something in life. Let me read a couple of things out of his book. He writes, it's a startling thing to realize that everyone alive worships. Everybody, everywhere. Worship is the fundamental drive of life. Atheists worship. Infidels worship. Skeptics, even Republicans and Democrats worship. Not sure about Democrats, right? I don't know. I'm not a Republican, by the way. I have to tell you, I'm a little worried about the Democrats on the hierarchical level, not the grassroots folks. They tend to be turning against us as a Christian community. Have you noticed that? I'm a little concerned about that, frankly. I don't want to get down that road, right? We're talking about worship, the fundamental drive. Lawyers, insurance agents, even Internal Revenue Service agents worship. The point is, they have no sense of the beyond or of the numinous, that is the holiness and amazement of God, but God has placed eternity in man's heart, as the book of Ecclesiastes tells us, 3:11. This urge causes men everywhere to worship. If they are not worshiping the true God, they are worshiping a God of their own composition. Worship, therefore, is a universal phenomenon. All people worship, for worship is the fundamental difference between humans and animals. Animals do not worship. I have a wonderful little house pet that my daughter asked me to watch about 12 years ago. He doesn't care about worship. He has no impulse. All he wants is to eat. And that's it. Animals do not worship. Now, Ray Stedman continues with his thought here by pointing out the meaning of worship And of course, the root idea is this, based on the word. Worship is to attribute worth and value to someone or something. Now, Stedman takes this statement and he makes this point. From a Christian point of view, he says, there are only two forms of worship. There is worship that is true, and there is worship that is false. Worship that is based on truth, and worship that is based on that which is false. And he says all people, all of humanity will fit into one of those two categories. And so listen to this. True worship is to attribute worth to a real being, one who is truly there and who is truly worthy. Dr. Francis Schaeffer wrote a book called The God Who Is There, to make the point that although God is invisible to our eyes, he is actually there. Pardon me. The function of believers is to learn what God is like and to acknowledge him, to ascribe worth to him, to reflect upon the value, beauty, and character of God. This is true worship. False worship, on the other hand, is to attribute worth to an illusion which is not really there or which is not worthy. It is not worthy of worship because it is merely imaginary. In the ancient world, false worship usually took the form of bowing before idols or images. People created representations of gods, little g, usually in the form of a human being or animal. Then they ascribed worth to it and regarded it as extremely valuable in their life. Now, he takes this and goes on to say, by way of application, in our modern world, men and women still worship. Either they worship the one true God, or often they worship some idealized view of themselves. It is amazing, he says, how many millions of people actually worship themselves. And how true is that? We call that narcissism. You've heard of that term. It's when people tend to have an exaggerated form of self, and they, in this exaggerated way, they think of themselves as the center of life. Now, you could also say, in perhaps putting all this in another category, people worship other things, of course. Sometimes people will worship power. Sometimes people worship money. People worship political parties or philosophies of life or sports. David mentioned this a moment ago. People do worship sports. There is also such a thing as celebrity worship. People who will idolize Hollywood-type celebrities. This does go on, I think we all know. But the truth of the matter is, most of all, priority above all, people tend to worship themselves. Do you remember a poem that was called Invictus? Out of the night that covers me, black as the pit from pole to pole, I thank whatever gods may be for my unconquerable soul. It matters not how straight the gate, how charged with punishments the scroll. I am the master of my fate. I am the captain of my soul. That whole poem reflects the sheer worship of oneself, the sheer idolatry of oneself. And so what I'm actually getting at in all of this is to again stress the truth that all of us worship something. As Stedman says, it's the driving force in all of life. And if that's true, and I'm convinced it is, and the Bible says that it is, then the only question remaining for us to answer is this: what is the nature of my worship? Is my worship based on that which is true, or is it based on that which is false? Now, I can assure you, if one's worship is false, in other words, if it is based on that which is imaginary or that which is an illusion of some kind, then I can tell you, in the process of time, you will begin to sense that. Because in the process of time, you will find yourself being let down. You will be increasingly unfulfilled. You will find yourself being disappointed and empty more and more. But then on the other hand, if what you worship is based on truth, meaning if it's based on the true God, the living God, as He has revealed Himself to us in the pages of Scripture, if our worship is based on truth, as Jesus said in John 4:24, then the effect of that is going to be wholly different. It will be life-giving. It will be encouraging. It will be hopeful. It will be energetic. It will be just uplifting in every way. In fact, let me explain something that I've often thought about. I remember in my pre-Christian life, and in my pre-Christian life, church and Christianity was not something that had a role or a place. So in my pre-Christian life, because of this desire to worship, although I wouldn't define it in those terms prior to becoming a Christian, but we're all driven, we're all pushing for something to bring joy and happiness and value and significance into our life. So as I am living my life in that context, I would give myself to things that brought me great pleasure and happiness, and things that I thought would have value to me. But here's the deal: the more I gave myself to those kind of things, the less and less and less did I experience the value that I had at first, or the pleasure that I experienced at the first. In other words, it's like this law of diminishing returns kicked in, and I found myself saying again and again, well, I guess it's not that big for me, it's not that important for me or valuable to me after all. Now, on the other hand, here's the thing that I have discovered. By becoming a Christian, I've discovered the more I give myself to God, the more I worship God, the more I deepen my roots in God, the greater and the greater the joy. Unlike the way it was in my pre-Christian life, the more I gave myself to God and understood of God, the greater the sense of life, the greater the sense of invigoration and encouragement, and the increase in hope, the increase in everything that was essentially positive. Now, needless to say, this is important for us to understand, because as Christian people, true worship is meant to be the foundation of everything that we say and do. And I love the fact also that worship is that which puts us in touch with reality. In real worship, you have the merging together of the natural world with the supernatural world. And you can imagine what happens in that context. In fact, anything great might happen in that context when God moves in to our arena of the natural world. Now, let me quickly move along here. If you would, here in Matthew 15, verse 8. In verse 8 and 9, Jesus is quoting Isaiah 29:13, an Old Testament passage, and he's applying this truth to his generation, and certainly it's applicable to our generation as well. Notice, this people honors me with their lips, but their heart is far away from me. But in vain do they worship me, teaching as doctrines the precepts of men. Now in verse 8, the phrase, this people honors me with their lips, meaning by what they say, by their speech. And so it's possible then to use our speech in such a way so as to give honor to God. And of course, to give honor to God in this way is to recognize and speak of His glory, of His majesty, of all of His incredible virtues and attributes. And it's really, in case you didn't know it, it's really important that we do this. The Bible refers to this as ascribing to the Lord. And we are called time and time again to ascribe to the Lord in ways that are appropriate to His nature. I'll give you two examples. Psalm 96:6. Splendor and majesty are before Him. Strength and beauty are in His sanctuary. Ascribe to the Lord, O families of the peoples. Ascribe to the Lord glory and strength. Ascribe to the Lord the glory of His name. And then 1 Chronicles 16:29. Ascribe to the Lord the glory due unto His name. Bring an offering and come before Him. Worship the Lord in the beauty of holiness. And so notice, we are to ascribe to the Lord. This word essentially means that we are to point to, we are to reflect upon, we are to refer to, we are to give it up for. You've heard people say that, I'm sure, even on television. Give it up for so-and-so. Well, that's the idea. Give it up to God. Give it up to Him. Ascribe to the Lord who He is. Speak of His nature, His incredible attributes and virtues. However, look again at this text, verse 8, chapter 15, Matthew. This people honors me with their lips. Again, they speak so as to honor God, but their heart is far away from me. And then in verse 9, but in vain do they worship me. Now, what's interesting to me here in verse 9, the word worship that is being used. The word here is proskuneo in Greek, and it means to fall down before or to prostrate oneself before, in this case, God. It's a physical idea. It's the idea of getting low to God in this outward and physical way. And Jesus is saying that His generation was doing that, but their heart was far from Him. Now, it's kind of interesting if you take this picture and apply it to us today. By the way, keeping in mind, there are many legitimate physical expressions of worshiping God, and they are appropriate. I came up with a short list. It's not exhaustive by any means, but let me walk you through just a few things so that you'll understand what I'm getting at. Notice, we can worship by bowing down, getting low before God, by kneeling before Him. It's appropriate. By singing to Him as we have, by clapping of hands. Clap ye hands, all ye people. Shout unto God with a voice of triumph. You ever hear that? How about hands raised? Psalm 134, verse 2. Lift up your hands in the sanctuary and bless the Lord. I know some people get uneasy with that, but don't. It's a perfectly acceptable expression of worship. By declaring praise and thanksgiving through speech, by participation in the Lord's Supper. What an amazing experience of worship it is when we share the bread and the cup. And then how about this? By sitting in silence. It's not always noise that means we're doing something good or spiritual. I like this, sitting in silence, being quiet before God, listening to Him. That is so valuable. And then how about this? By our hearing the Word of God. To me, in fact, I don't doubt this at all. I would argue that the highest expression of worship is when we truly sit before God and we hear His Word and we say, God, speak to me. And we zone in on what the Word that is being taught, and we kind of isolate ourselves from everything that is going on around us, and we just focus on the Word and hearing the Word of God and letting the Holy Spirit bring application to our life. So this is a short list. Now, on the other hand, the point that I'm wanting to make here is that here is a list of legitimate expressions of worship. They are all physical in nature. However, here's the thing. In all of these examples, you can do them without engaging your heart. You can practice these without engaging your heart in any way. Which means we can be giving our body over to God without giving to God our heart. We can sing a song without engaging the heart. We can speak God's praise and lift our hands and do that without engaging the heart. Jesus said this in John 4:22, speaking to the Samaritan woman. He says, you worship what you do not know. We worship what we know, for salvation is from the Jews. That is, salvation comes through the Jewish people. But an hour is coming, and now is, when the true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and truth. For such people, the Father seeks to be His worshipers. God is spirit, and those who worship Him must worship in spirit and truth. And so notice, true worship is in spirit. That the idea is it comes from within us. It's spirit to spirit, human spirit to the Holy Spirit. There's an enmeshment. My heart is yours, God. From within I adore you. I worship you. And then, of course, he says our worship must be in truth, which means it needs to be thoughtful, rational, based on true views of God and true views of what God has accomplished in our behalf in the work of His death, burial, and resurrection. And then also remember this, because emotions are a part of who we are, and because emotion is going to respond to what's going on inside us, especially as we think and reason, then it's so that in our worship there is always going to be this awakening of healthy emotions, this awakening of healthy affections for God. I like this paragraph by John Piper. He says, the drawing near of the heart to God means the coming alive of our feelings for God. Worship is an affair of the heart. It's an affair of feeling and of emotion. Now, there's another gentleman by the name of Jonathan Edwards who wrote an entire book on what he called religious affections. And when he uses the term religion, he thinks of it in terms of the spiritual life. But here's what he wrote, and this is important for us. I think it's clear and abundantly evident that true religion lies very much in the affections. It is not that religion in the hearts of the truly godly is ever exactly proportionate to the amount of affection, for undoubtedly there is much emotion in the true saints that is not spiritual. All is not from grace, much is from nature. That is, it can be spiritual, but not always. Some of us are wired differently, and some are, especially the sanguine type temperament, is always jumping around and kind of just kind of being an emotional type person. So he says our religious affections are often mixed. Still, it is obvious that religion consists so much of affection that without holy affections, there can be no real faithful heart. If the great things of religion are rightly understood, they will affect the heart. And by that, he means the emotions. Now, look at the rest of this. God has given affections to man for the same purpose. He has given all the faculties of the human soul, namely, that they might serve the great business for which God has created him. Can we Christians find anything worthier to respond to with all our affections than the gospel of Jesus Christ? Good question. For the glory and beauty of the blessed Lord shine in all their luster in the face of an incarnate, infinitely loving, meek, compassionate, and dying Redeemer. All the virtues of the Lamb of God, such as humility, patience, meekness, submission, obedience, love, and compassion, are shown to us in such a way as to most deeply move our affections. We see, too, the awful effects of the nature of our sin, which our Redeemer undertook and suffered for us. There we see, in the most affecting way, God's hatred of sin. Now look at this. What cause then have we to be humbled in the dust, that we are not moved more than we are? Now, in my view, that's an important question for all of us to wrestle with. Why are we not more moved? Now, I'm not talking about getting crazy. You know that. I'm talking about holy affections. Holy affections for God. I know people who are greatly moved by sports, don't you? And what happens is, on the basis of what they see and hear, they like it, and it moves them either to joy or to grief. But their emotions respond. They're so in love with sports, for example. I know people who are moved by their work. There are people who are moved by politics. People who are moved by clothes. People who are moved by new things in their life. If that's true, should we not then, as saved people, be moved toward God with a burning heart of love, with affections for God that are rooted in passion and delight and pleasure in him? Let me read this other paragraph by Piper. He says, worship is gladly reflecting back to God the radiance of his worth, and it stands as the act of which no greater act can be conceived. to see God and know Him and be in His presence is the soul's final feast. Beyond this, there is no quest. Do you see what he's really saying here? That in human life, there's nothing superior to being in the sacred, holy presence of God. Nothing. And it means, yes, it means that too. There are things greater than what people give themselves to in this life that bring them pleasure. And I can tell you this, and people who are believers and have been in God's presence in that really rich way, you know exactly there is nothing more powerful, more moving, more life-giving than that. I was converted in a revival church, a church that was literally on fire. And I remember watching people under the conviction of God, and their emotions were so moved by the power of God's presence. And other believers who were just transformed, their whole life changed almost in a moment by being in the presence of God. It's the soul's final feast, the greatest experience that we can ever have in this life. I have one final thought for you to consider. I wonder if you realize that you and I are becoming more and more like what we worship. Psalm 135:15 says this: "The idols of the nations are but silver and gold, the work of man's hands. They have mouths, but they do not speak." That's sarcasm, by the way. There's laughter going on here. "They have eyes, but they do not see. They have ears, but they do not hear, nor is there any breath at all in their mouths." But here's the tragedy. Those who make them will be like them. Yes, everyone who trusts in them. I came across a book just this week. I never heard of this fellow before, but what he wrote was very powerful. The book is called "We Become What We Worship." And here's what he wrote: "What people revere, they resemble, either for ruin or for restoration." This theme is all through the scriptures. Our worship exposes us and changes us. We either revere the world and are conformed to the sinful patterns of the world, or we revere God and are progressively conformed into His likeness. We are being molded into one of these two images. Our worship and our affections right now are pointers to a future trajectory. Our worship is either aimed at our ruin, or our worship is aimed at our restoration. But it is aimed in either case. We are becoming what we worship. That's very true. So I don't know about you, but I choose to worship God. And I'm not going to come into a meeting place like this where we are coming to meet God. I'm going to come prepared. I want to come to experience His presence and to hear His word. This is a greater thing than we could ever imagine that is taking place. This is what the New Testament calls the sacred assembling of the people of God. And we assemble in a place, in a manner like this, and we are in the very presence of God. Now, I realize God is omnipresent. I understand that. He's everywhere. But I'm talking now about the manifest presence of God, where God is made real and experiential. When we come into this sacred assembly, God is wanting to move among us by His presence. And it will happen if we engage our heart. If we engage our heart. to God. God wants your heart. I remember counseling a couple one time just about 30 years ago. And this lady and this guy, I said to them, tell me what's going on. And the lady said, well, you know, he doesn't pay attention to me. He doesn't do this, he doesn't do that. And the guy responded to that. I'm condensing it. He said, I don't know what more I can do for her. I do this for her, I do that, I do this, I do that. And she finally looked in his face and she says, you just don't get it. I don't want what you do for me. I want you. I want your heart. I want you to love me, to care for me, to just feel with me what life is really doing around us. I want you to be involved in my life as opposed to being roommates in a house where you just do things without noticing me. Sometimes I think that's what God is saying to us. He doesn't want our physical movement. He wants our heart. He wants your heart. I'm going to tell you something right now. He has mine. And I hope he has yours as well. Let's pray.